Hi guys, just wanted to do a quick build guide for Kyle. So you can probably tell from the title and thumbnail, this build just revolves around Kyle's fourth ability, sort of trying to fly through the air as much as possible and, smash your enemies with his fourth. When I was putting it together, it was mostly just for a bit of fun. And because it doesn't use any catalysts or activators, it was sort of supposed to be a sort of this low barrier of entry build that anyone can do. Because most builds at the minute seem to be these sort of min-max builds that use 10 catalysts, 10 activators, and obviously not everyone's going to have those to spend, so I just wanted to do a very minimal build. But it ended up actually being a fairly strong build. Sort of his fourth ability can be used to one-shot a lot of the mini bosses, sort of the yellow health bosses, and you can one-shot a phase of those sort of immunity bosses that get the spheres, which is quite surprising. And so the whole build basically is using his fourth as much as possible, and whilst that's on cooldown, you're sort of spamming your first ability to build up your resource meter, the sort of magnetic force meter, so that you can use your fourth ability and do more damage with that fourth ability. So in terms of the build, what mod you want? So for sub-module, I like mid-air maneuvering. It's just such an all-round good mod, sort of on anyone that you use it in. And it gives Kyle a bit more mobility to use his fourth ability, sort of flying through the air. But if you're on a budget and you've already got a different sub-module built up, or you want to use a blue sub-module, go for it. It doesn't sort of make too much difference for the build. Now, pretty much with all builds, you're going to want increased HP. You do just need a little bit more tankiness for hard mode content. And then for most builds, I'd go increased defense, but obviously with no catalysts and no activators, you've got to make a few sacrifices. And since Kyle's abilities revolve a lot around shield, instead you're going to want increased shield. And I'll explain why in sort of a little bit just to go through his abilities. And then next, since this whole build revolves around using his fourth ability, you're going to want as much cooldown as possible to bring it down, because you can see it's sort of 60 seconds by default, which is quite high. And so you're going to want to have MP conversion. This is just a massive amount of skill cooldown, and the negative MP doesn't matter. You're going to want to have nimble fingers, again, a lot of cooldown. And then you're going to want to have a unleveled, focus on non-attribute and focus on tech. Reason being up for unleveled is it uses less mod slots, but it gives you the same amount of cooldown. So the main reason why you want shield is his passive, that is sort of his special resource meter that he uses to use his fourth ability, revolves around his max shield. So you can see here, magnetic force max amount is his max shield times 200%. And so you want to stack that max shield as much as possible, because you can also see here, when the shield's fully consumed, you gain magnetic care, which will regenerate his shield. And so that's what allows him to be tanky with this minimal build, but also having more shield allows his fourth ability to deal more damage. And so you can see here, that damage is quite a lot just flat out, times 11,000 of his skill power, but then also it will deal additional damage based on the amount of magnetic force you got. So more shields, more magnetic force, more damage. And so to use his fourth ability, not only do you need it off cooldown, of course, you also need some magnetic force. And so that's why you want a lot of cooldown as well, is because his first ability is going to later stack that magnetic force really quickly. With it having 3 stacks and only a 2.2 second cooldown per stack, you're going to have this ability up all the time. And so you can see here, if you hit someone with your first ability, it's going to give you magnetic force recovery of 30% of his max shield. So again, the more max shield you have, the more magnetic force you're doing, and that will lead back into his fourth ability to deal more damage. And so the idea is that basically you'll use his fourth ability. While that's on cooldown, you'll spam his first ability on the enemies to recharge your magnetic force. And then you can go and use his fourth ability again. And you're just continually cycling between these two abilities. So it actually ends up being quite a good farming build just for your sort of general content. And then in terms of bossing, it's not going to be doing an insane amount of damage. You've not got catalyst, you've not got activator, so you can't really expect it to do crazy damage. But you are going to have quite a lot of survival and still be able to put out a lot of damage, since you can still spam his first and fourth ability in intercept battles. You're not sort of restricted by MP or anything like that. You're purely restricted by his magnetic force. So you'll do quite a surprising amount of damage in intercept battles. So in terms of the build for intercept battles, it's pretty much just the same. The only difference is you'll remove focus on non-attribute, focus on tech, and you'll instead put whatever the relevant resistance mod is. In this case, I'm showing electric just because that's what I was last doing with Kyle. And that'll give you a little bit more tankiness. And so in terms of reactor, you're going to want a reactor that is non-attribute and tech, so a materialized mechanics reactor. And in terms of what weapon you want to have for that, really the weapon doesn't matter for this build. Being a budget build, I wouldn't expect you to build up a gun specifically for this. Just use whatever gun you have built up already. So in this case, I have a tactical rifle built up, so that's what I'm using for this. But whatever weapon doesn't really matter. Just make sure you got non-attribute skill power and your tech skill power. In terms of these stats that you want to go along with it, cooldown is 100%. That's the main stat that you want. After that, it doesn't really matter too much. If you manage to get a non-attribute or you manage to get a tech with it, then great. But otherwise, it doesn't really matter too much. Cooldown is a must, but anything else, just that's fine. Now, your external components are quite important. You're going to be wanting to stack that shield as much as possible. So in terms of auxiliary power, you're going to want to have a max shield primary, and then ideally you're going to want to have a max health secondary, because that's going to give you a little bit more tankiness. If you can then also get fire resistance as a secondary, that's great, because it's going to give you a little bit more tankiness as well. In terms of the sensor, again, max shield primary if possible, and shield recovery is great, but as long as you've got that max shield primary, you're in a good spot. If you can get a chill resistant secondary as well, that'll be good, because again, more resistance is more tankiness. For memory, max shield primary and shield recovery are the two main ones that you want. If you can get electric resistance as a secondary alongside those two stats, then perfect. And then last for the processor, max shield primary, max shield secondary, that's sort of the main things that you want. And you will also notice I'm using a bravery set here, but just for the 2-piece sets. So you've got the bravery processor and the bravery auxiliary power in this case. And what that does is it gives you some HP recovery, which isn't sort of the important thing, but mainly it gives you that extra max shield. So you're just stacking shields on top of shields. So if you do have access to the bravery set, I'd definitely try and use a 2-piece set of that. And then just quickly, as mentioned, you don't need a particular gun. I've been using different guns with this build. I've used sort of the Wave of Light, Secret Garden, Thunder Cage. It really doesn't matter, just use whatever gun you got built up. So yeah, this build is mostly just for a bit of fun really, and sort of a change of pace to all these sort of one-shot builds that require sort of 10 catalysts and, you know, an activator and everything like that. So the barrier to entry for this build is all you need is Kyle really. And I have recently released a video on how to farm Kyle the quickest way, so feel free to go watch that if you don't have him yet. So yeah, I hope that helps. Thanks.